Human Rights Watch has raised serious concerns over a call by the Israeli military for the immediate evacuation of civilians from areas south of the Litani River. The order affects hundreds of thousands of people in southern Lebanon and warns that anyone moving south could be putting their lives at risk. Rights groups say such sweeping evacuation calls could violate international humanitarian law, particularly if they result in forced displacement or fail to account for vulnerable civilians, such as the elderly, the sick, and people with disabilities. So for more on this, we're joined now by Lama Fakih, who is a Global Program Director at Human Rights Watch and joining us from Beirut. Lama, thank you for your time. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's begin with the evacuation order itself. Why does Human Rights Watch see this call as raising serious concerns under international humanitarian law?
Thank you. And after we saw that evacuation order on March 4th, there was a second evacuation order for an area totaling around 22 kilometers squared in the Beirut suburbs, where an additional 700,000 people are estimated to live. So what we have seen is in the context of 2 days, nearly 1 million people residing in areas where these evacuation warnings have been issued. Now, under international law, it is a war crime to forcibly displace a civilian population. Civilians can be evacuated in very limited circumstances, in circumstances where it is necessary for their own security or where it is necessary for an imperative military objective. What our concern is with these orders and the manner in which they have been given, calling on, again, hundreds of thousands of people to leave immediately, that it does not actually afford people an opportunity to safely flee. And of course, we will know that there will be people who are unable to leave. And for those civilians, their protected status under international law does not change. They cannot be subjected to attack simply because they continue to reside in an area where there has been an evacuation warning issued.
The order affects hundreds of thousands of people across southern Lebanon. From where you're standing, what are the practical challenges that this can create for civilians who are being asked to leave immediately?
These orders have created a humanitarian crisis in the country. Again, in a matter of days, we have seen hundreds of thousands of people displaced from their homes. They are urgently seeking accommodation. These people, in many cases, are not able to pursue their livelihoods. They are not sure how they're going to be able to support themselves and their families in the days and weeks to come, unsure when they may be able to return to the areas where they are from. So, of course, there was a responsibility on local authorities to assist in the response, and there will be an increasing demands on humanitarian actors in the country to try to meet the needs of the population. And again, the warring parties here have an obligation to not undertake their attacks in a way that is doing undue harm to the civilian population. They must take adequate precautions to protect civilians, and civilians are entitled to the basic necessities, even in the context of displacement.
We've spoken generally about the risks that the humanitarian risks that people generally of southern Lebanon are facing. But what are the unique dangers that each of these groups are facing in this situation? We mentioned the elderly, the sick, and people living with disabilities, these groups.
So one of the things that we saw yesterday with the evacuation order of the southern suburbs of Beirut is that hospitals also had to be evacuated. We know that people's ability to seek care from their providers is disrupted. So people who have chronic illnesses may have a more difficult time in being able to access the kinds of treatments and medications that they depend upon to live. When people's livelihoods are also disrupted, their ability to care for themselves and their families, of course, is encumbered. Children across the country have also been denied their access to education this past week. Schools have been closed. It's unclear how long that closure is going to persist. And of course, for people that have physical disabilities, it can be incredibly difficult to respond to these evacuation warnings. Some of the warnings that have been issued have also been issued in the middle of the night. And imagine, having a disability that limits you physically in a context where you're being asked to flee immediately without any assistance and in the middle of the night. So these are the kinds of obstacles that people are facing, everyday people just trying to manage in the context of these ongoing and escalating hostilities in the country.
So let's talk about the definitions there. Under international law, when is an evacuation considered lawful, and then when does it become a forced displacement?
So warnings can and should be issued to a civilian population when that is done to ensure their security. But they should not be issued in a way that seeks to terrorize or to collectively punish a population. And again, the forced displacement of a civilian population under the laws of war is a violation. It can amount to a war crime. Civilians should only be displaced when it is required for their own security or for a specific imperative military need. And those are defined and limited exceptions to the broader rule that the civilians should not be displaced. So again, the context of these warnings, 48 hours, nearly 1 million people, broad residential areas, it raises serious concerns about their compliance with international law, and more importantly, serious concerns about protection of civilians, the ability of people to remain safe, the ability of people to actually comply with what are very sweeping and immediate evacuation warnings.
So what steps does Human Rights Watch hope to see then from the international community as well as the Lebanese authorities to ensure that civilians are protected and that there is some level of accountability here?
So we saw on March 5th, Israeli Minister Smotrich made a public statement where he said that the Beirut suburbs would become like Khan Yunis. And the implications of his statement are clear, that the Beirut suburbs will be destroyed. And the question really remains, how will other states act? Overnight, we saw that there was extensive bombings in the Beirut suburbs. We still need to assess the full extent of that damage. What are other states doing to de-escalate the situation in a way that would ensure that civilians are protected and that the parties are complying with their obligations under international humanitarian law? We are urging them to do so, not just in words, but also in actions, condemning attacks that violate the basic principles of civilian protection under international law, and ensuring that steps are taken to care for the civilian population.
Right, and one can imagine that that's necessary because many civilians in Lebanon were already displaced by previous hostility. So you can only imagine how this latest evacuation then affects the situation even more.
That's right. We did see in 2024 that over 1 million people were displaced. Some of them remained displaced even though we were in a ceasefire period. During the ceasefire period as well, Lebanon continued to be subjected to attacks, in some cases attacks that also were affecting civilian life, killing and injuring civilians. Right now, attention has to be on the compliance of the warring parties in the laws of war. Civilians should never be targeted. Civilians must be protected under the law.
Absolutely. Lama, thank you so much. We'll leave it there for today. We appreciate your time again.
Thank you.
Lama Fakih is Global Program Director at Human Rights Watch, speaking to us from Beirut.